This video was made possible by the Curiosity Stream and Nebula bundle. Sign up and get the ad-free and extended version of this video available only on Nebula. The United States is a powerhouse in the cultivation of corn. When driving across the upper Midwest, you will be met by vast cornfields, stretching to the horizon in either direction. This industry was the bedrock of the American diet. Corn flour, corn bread, cornmeal, all staples of traditional American food. But in the last decade, this industry has been slowly pivoting to an entirely different industry, the energy industry. Today, nearly half of all corn production goes to the production of ethanol, a biofuel that is being mixed with gasoline with the goal of reducing the carbon footprint of your daily commute. For the average American, 10% of their gasoline is now composed of ethanol, and corn farmers across the US are making more than ever thanks to the government-mandated ingredient of gasoline pushing the value of their crop higher. With electronic vehicles on the rise and the pandemic's effects on fuel consumption hitting the hydrocarbon fuel industry hard, ethanol lobby groups are now pushing the Biden administration to make an even larger percentage of our fuel to be made with this ethanol. But this begs an important question. Why? There is nothing inherently wrong with burning fuel, as long as we have a method of absorbing its products. But we've become like the yeast trapped in a brewer's vat, eating the fuel it was provided and releasing toxic byproducts, until, at some point, the alcohol it produces reaches a concentration it can no longer survive. A closed system with no corrections to keep the balance is unsustainable. Biofuels seek to address this imbalance. Fuels that we create using organic material from plants and animals, which, unlike fossil fuels, can be restored over a short period of time. Then, when we restart the cycle, regrowing the organic material, the carbon we release into the atmosphere when burning them is theoretically absorbed once again, restoring our balance with nature. Theoretically is the key word. In 2019, the US received about 5% of its total energy from biomass. 45% of that was generated from synthesized biofuels, primarily ethanol. The primary method of producing ethanol is with our little doomed friends from earlier, yeast. When deprived of oxygen, yeast and bacteria use an anaerobic form of respiration where instead of converting sugars to energy and carbon dioxide, they convert it to energy and ethanol. The United States is the largest producer of bioethanol, thanks to its abundant supply of corn, and the quantity is rising. The production process isn't terribly complicated. The corn is simply ground into a flour and used as a feedstock for our microbial friends to turn into ethanol. What we need to worry about is all the extra steps needed before and after this. First, let's do a simple calculation of how much farmland we would need to grow enough corn. This is a map of croplands in the United States. The breadbasket, or corn basket, of the United States is the upper Midwest, which is why the brunt of the infrastructure for ethanol production is located there, to avoid transportation costs of shipping corn, which has a lot of unusable non-sugar weight. This map is super interesting. The green area totals about 166 million hectares. 22% of that land area, about 37 million hectares, goes to corn, and 40% of that corn goes to make bioethanol. So, 8.8% of this map is going to make ethanol, to provide just 10% of the fuel that fills American fuel tanks. The ethanol industry wants that figure to rise to 15% and ultimately are targeting 20%. Extrapolating that 8.8% farmland figure, we can see that it would take around 17.6% of the current total farmland in the United States to achieve 20% at the current gasoline usage. Nearly 1/5 of all of the United States farmland devoted to making something we can't eat seems extreme. And we can already see the effects a fraction of that number is having. At the turn of the millennium, Over 90% of the United States' substantial corn production went to feeding people and animals. Only 5% was used to produce ethanol. Then, the average price of a bushel of corn, whatever the hell a bushel is, was $2. Today, the price of corn has risen with the extra demand from the biofuel industry. The price of a bushel of corn... Hang on. Alexa, what the hell is a bushel?
A bushel is an imperial and US customary unit of volume based upon an
Okay,
earlier
no, Alexa,
bushel
stop.
dry
Stop.
capacity.
Hey. Alexa, how much is a bushel?
1 bushel is about 35 litres.
Sound. Thank you. Ooh, I hit my glasses. Okay, the price of 35 litres of corn today fluctuates between about $4 and $7. That's great for farmers, but the end result is that it encourages more natural habitats to be converted to farmland. Over the past decade, croplands in the United States have expanded at a rate of over 1 million acres per year, much of it over important natural habitats. Corn was the main crop planted on these freshly destroyed natural habitats. Despite this expansion in corn growth, food prices have risen, not only for corn-based products, but for products that rely on corn as feedstock for animals. Eggs, milk, and meat have all increased in price, costing Americans millions without them even realizing. But the price to the average US citizen is much higher than higher grocery bills. This industry simply would not exist without government subsidies. To illustrate the inefficiency of this industry, one researcher, the late Professor David Pimentel, who was the first agricultural researcher to call for the banning of the toxic DDT insecticide, did the math. He tallied up all of the inputs for the production of ethanol, including the seeds, labor, machinery, fuel, fertilizer, insecticide, water, electricity, and transport. He found that to produce 1 litre of fuel-grade ethanol would require an energy input of 6,600 kilocalories. We have one major red flag right from the start. 1 litre of ethanol only contains 5,130 kilocalories of energy. This process takes 29% more energy than it provides. This is an energy-negative process. If it was energy neutral, the energy we extracted from sunlight using photosynthesis would match the total energy we input to get a usable product. Imagine an ancient farmer working the soil without machinery, irrigating his plants, removing weeds, harvesting the grain, only to have spent more calories than they received. They would starve. This is not a green technology. The reality is, photosynthesis is an incredibly inefficient way to turn sunlight into usable energy. The energy efficiency of photosynthesis is usually under 1% for plants, meaning, on average, plants can only capture and convert about 1% of sunlight. Humans can outdo that with cheap solar cells that can achieve between 12 and 20% efficiency. Corn is even lower than the plant average, at 0.25%. If humans could eat electricity, we would. Growing plants for food is a necessity. Growing food for power is completely and utterly irrational. It's not just wasteful in energy, it's wasteful in water, an incredibly scarce resource in this modern world. Compared to fossil fuels and renewable energy sources like solar, biomass energy uses substantially more water. On average, biomass crops have a water footprint 72 times higher than fossil fuels and 240 times more than solar. Over 80% of our freshwater usage already goes to agriculture. Increasing biomass energy crops would push this even higher, putting more strain on an already limited resource. 240 times more water than solar and 48 times less efficient at converting sunlight into energy. What's the deal here? Why is the government subsidizing this industry when that money could be going into actual renewable technologies like solar, wind, batteries, and hydrogen fuel? The reality is, this industry exists because it represents 300,000 jobs, and those jobs are represented by one of the biggest lobby groups in the United States. Any responsible scientist or engineer would see this industry should not exist, and we should be investing in alternative technologies. There are better versions of biofuel. Sugarcane-derived ethanol is energy positive, but its success in Brazilian agriculture is helping drive the destruction of the Amazon. One researcher found, using satellite imagery to estimate the exact percentage of farmland expansion into forested areas in Brazil, that it would take 20 years for the carbon released due to deforestation to be reclaimed by the reductions in emissions from the use of sugarcane bioethanol. And that does nothing for the losses in biodiversity. If our break-even point is 20 years in the future, what's the point? Surely we should be aiming to not be using fossil fuels in cars at all in 20 years' time. By the time we pay off the carbon we sunk into the endeavour, we should have moved away from fossil fuels entirely, and we have lost valuable natural habitats in the process. The United States is helping drive demand for this sugarcane ethanol, as they are the largest importer. There are other alternatives, like cellulosic ethanol, which aims to fix the issue of competing with food products like corn and sugarcane. It aims to use grasses like switchgrass because it grows fast and is cheap. But despite that, ethanol made with it manages to be even more expensive and energy intensive due to the extra steps needed to convert the cellulose into sugars the microbes can eat. Another method aims to use algae grown in ponds. Certain algae strains double in mass in just 6 hours, so creating large amounts of biomass can happen fast, 30 times faster than food crops. They also flourish when carbon dioxide is pumped into their tanks, which is why algae are responsible for more than 40% of the global carbon fixation. There are plenty of strains of algae that grow in saltwater or wastewater too, which would help us conserve our precious freshwater supplies. But the quantities of water are immense, and the use of salt water or wastewater brings in extra steps for the extraction of the useful product. Just like corn-derived ethanol, the energy extracted is much lower than the energy we need to put in, making it unsustainable and unprofitable. Algae-based biofuels currently cost between $300 and $2,600 per barrel. But because of its great potential to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, researchers like those at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, who have set a goal to reduce costs to $3 per gallon by 2030, are working on ways to improve and make algae biofuels an affordable possibility, primarily by developing new strains of algae that are perfectly suited for our needs. Algae do have one massive advantage that could see their use in niche applications. Algae have a much higher fat content than food crops, which means they can be turned into much higher energy green crude oil rather than ethanol. This green crude oil could potentially be converted into fuels for transportation that needs much higher energy densities that ethanol cannot provide, like fuel for planes. The future of aviation fuel is incredibly hazy. We have no clear answer for replacing kerosene in that process. Aviation fuel needs particular properties that ethanol simply does not have, and we have no clear answer for how to decarbonize the aviation industry. Batteries are too heavy for anything but extremely short-range small planes. Hydrogen's low energy to volume characteristics makes it a nightmare to integrate into airframes, and biofuels are either too expensive or not carbon neutral. I dive into this subject a little deeper in the extended cut available exclusively on Nebula, and if I see a lot of people signing up for Nebula for that extended cut, I may just make a full episode for YouTube too. You get a lot more than just extended cuts by signing up to Nebula through the Curiosity Stream and Nebula bundle deal. You will get access to our exclusive content like the 9-part, 2-hour-long Logistics of D-Day series, along with originals from Wendover Productions, Mustard, Tom Scott, and City Beautiful. Ad-free versions of our videos and podcasts, and that's all bundled in for free when you sign up to Curiosity Stream for the extremely low price of $14.79 a year. $14.79 for a year's access to award-winning documentaries on Curiosity Stream and supporting your favorite video creators in the process. That's a win-win. If you are looking for something else to watch right now, you could watch our previous video explaining the material science of carbon nanotubes, or watch Real Science's latest video exploring why British and Irish people cannot donate blood in the United States.